Bob Herbert's op-ed.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick. Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to op-ed.tv. Robert Moses died nearly 4 decades ago. He's largely forgotten now, but there was a time when he wielded the power of a colossus in New York City and New York State. Nicknamed the Master Builder, he was the driving force behind the creation of, hold your breath, the Jones Beach State Park, the Triborough Bridge, the Queens Midtown Tunnel, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, the New York World's Fair, Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, Stuyvesant Town, the Long Island Expressway, and on and on and on. You'd imagine that someone with that kind of track record would be a celebrated figure in this town. But Moses was hugely controversial and in many quarters reviled. I'll look back on the remarkable life and times of Robert Moses with my guest, Jason Haber, a New York City real estate expert who has lectured extensively on Robert Moses. Jason, hi, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me on today.
Appreciate it. So most New Yorkers don't realize it now, but we live in an environment that was, a physical environment that was largely shaped by Robert Moses.
Every day you touch something that Moses built, that it's part of your existence here in New York City.
Isn't it?
Every single day.
And so who was this now largely forgotten man, and how did he become so influential in politics and government in New York?
First things first, when you Google Robert Moses, oftentimes you'll see things like Senator Robert Moses, Governor Robert Moses, Mayor Robert Moses. He was none of those
All
things.
wrong.
All wrong. Was never elected to office. He did run for the Senate once. It was a disaster.
Got destroyed,
got
right.
destroyed. So unelected, which is first, we have to say, very key important point. Secondly, he drew his power from the federal government, from the state government, and from the city government. And he, at one point, held 12 appointed positions at the same time. Now, any one of those 12 would be a career capstone for someone.
Yeah, these were important positions.
These were not small positions.
Yeah.
But you know, he would propose projects in one commission head, and then he would approve what he had proposed in another body. I mean, we've never had this before. It's not supposed to work that way in a democracy.
So why did he hold so many offices? I mean, he worked for mayors and governors, but how did he get so many appointments?
Well, first, he had the power in his hands. It starts very small, but it starts with Jones Beach, where he first achieves power under the leadership of Al Smith. And the Al Smith story is really fascinating in the history of New York. Robert Moses first goes into government as a reformer. He gets kicked out of government because he tries to make so many changes. By the time he's 35, he couldn't get a job in government.
This is a reformer back in the days, the heyday of Tammany Hall.
About 100 years ago. Yeah. So he then comes back to power with Al Smith, and then of course creates Jones Beach, which everyone agrees is a masterpiece of planning in of itself. It's worth noting, though, that he lied to the legislature about the cost of Jones Beach, and he learned techniques along the way, which is if you fund something and it's halfway done, you go back to the legislature and you say things like, are you going to leave a project halfway done? Well, of course not, and they're going to fund the rest of it.
So even if you go over budget.
Yeah, it's okay. But what's interesting about Moses is he's so popular, mostly because of his initial successes in building in tabula rasa, in empty spaces on Long Island, Jones Beach, that he would threaten to resign his position if he didn't get his way. Now, if you're a mayor or a governor and you've got to listen to the will of the people, you can't lose your most popular commissioner. They couldn't afford to lose Moses, so Moses was simply reappointed over and over again.
Talk a little bit about the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, because that's where he got so much of the revenue that financed projects that he wanted to build.
So it's the heart and soul of the Moses Empire. Moses uses the Triborough Bridge Authority to basically underwrite his entire program. The funds for that authority, which are supposed to go back to the state, Did not. They
This
stayed.
this is a toll bridge.
Toll. So you basically paid a tribute to Moses in coin every time you went over the bridge.
Right.
And Moses controlled the funds. He wrote deep into the body of the legislation to create that authority. He wrote language that no one bothered to look at. It gave him the power to issue bonds against the income. So this is really important because if you have income coming in of $100 million, you can issue bonds of like $1 billion or so against the revenue. So you have a continuous revenue stream. You have bonds that are now issued, and then he controls that money. So it's not
because it's outside the tax revenues
the tax revenue
and the normal budgetary powers of New York City and New York State.
Right.
Yeah.
So elected officials are then going to Moses to try to use his funds for other projects, and Moses gets to decide at his sole command what happens to that money. And he uses it with impunity, and he decides he's going to use that money to build in his vision of what he thinks it means to live in a modern city. Post-World War II, New York becomes not just the center of the country, but the center of the world in many ways, right? Like the UN comes here. Right. We're not a capital city, right? Like when we think of most international cities, London's a capital city, Paris is a capital city. New York isn't a capital, not even of our state, let alone our country. So New York takes on this international flavor. And Moses is going to build for all the GIs that are coming here, all the internationals that are coming here, and he's going to, in his mind, create the modern city, the Le Corbusier version of what a modern city is.
Mm-hmm. And that city was an angular city with simple, in many cases, high-rise buildings and highways running right through the city.
Order. So the idea was that the city of the old, which is the chaos and cacophony, in some cases a lot of the tenement housing, we're going to replace all of that disorder with this sort of linear order of sort of monotone high-rises, big, wide highways running through the city, and that's going to be the city of the future.
So I mentioned that he's reviled to this day in many circles, and it seems odd because a lot of the things that he built are things that a lot of people are crazy about. Jones Beach, we mentioned, Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, et cetera, et cetera. How did he come to be such a loathed figure in New York? What caused it?
I sum up Robert Moses in this one sentence. New York needed a Robert Moses. Instead, we got the Robert Moses. So we needed someone who could think about planning for the future. Instead, we got someone who wanted to plan for the future in a way that he saw it without any checks and balances that we have in a democracy. And what happens is when one person is empowered to make those kinds of decisions, and that one person is racist, has a disdain clearly for poor people, for immigrants, for working class folks, there are going to be generational implications for those people and for the city. And that's really what happened here.
So let's cite a couple of examples. I mean, one of the famous ones has to do with the lead up to the creation of the Cross Bronx Expressway.
Yes.
And there was a neighborhood, East Tremont section of the Bronx, and that neighborhood had to be cleared for this highway. Talk a little bit about that.
Moses had a slum clearance committee, and they sent out notices telling people they had 90 days to get out. He was just trying to sort of shake them up, as he would say. The idea behind the highway was it was going to cut right through East Tremont. The neighborhood there formed an association and found that the highway could be moved in a way that wouldn't cost any more, that would save thousands of homes. And they did what any good citizen would do. They got their assembly person on board, they got their congressperson on board, they got the borough president on board, and interestingly enough, they got the Manhattan borough president on board, whose name was Robert Wagner.
Right.
And he was running for mayor. They have a letter from Wagner saying he will not support the plan for the Cross Bronx Expressway. He appeared at a public meeting saying, I will not support the Cross Bronx Expressway. And this is in the 1950s. This isn't the 1960s. Culturally, things were very different. People weren't rallying against government in the way that they would do 10, 15 years later.
It's also important to point out that this was a vibrant neighborhood.
Yes.
This was not a slum.
Not at all. No, you had people, you had a really functioning middle class. You had the Jewish neighborhood, Italian neighborhood. It was a diverse neighborhood, and you had people living in a city, and they weren't working in finance or in real estate, but they had working class jobs, and they were making it in the city. And so they came down to City Hall expecting that they would win because they had the support of all their elected officials. But at this point in the history of the city, none of that elected official support mattered because they didn't have the power. Robert Moses did.
Right.
Moses comes into the old Board of Estimate room, whispers into the ear. All of a sudden, Wagner had a change of heart. So-and-so changed his Lyons, changed his mind. Next thing you know, it's approved unanimously.
And it's an example of the tremendous power he had. So you had the community against him. You had public officials listening to the community and saying this is not a good idea. And yet, as you point out, one man gets the public officials to change their mind.
Yeah, and not only that.
The other point was that there was no reason for the Cross Bronx to go through that neighborhood.
None at all.
Explain that.
Well, there was another route that would have avoided decimating thousands of homes. He simply could have put it there. He just didn't want to because he just didn't care. He saw it as an impediment, and he saw people as getting into his way. And he would complain that those who criticize don't build. This has to be done. We're going to lose federal funding for this if we don't do it this way. Any excuse in the book. He just didn't care, especially the fact that they were working class people, which he looked down on. And when he walked into that Board of Estimate meeting, he sneered at them. He looked down at them as these small, little people, and he just didn't care.
There were 1,500 buildings demolished to make way in that neighborhood to make way for the Cross Bronx, and all of those families, thousands of people, were just thrown out of their homes. They had to go elsewhere.
Yes, and then his slum clearance committee didn't help them find another one.
Right. So you mentioned that he's racist, and Robert Caro, who wrote the definitive biography of Bob Moses, said that at the very least he was one of the most racist individuals he'd ever met.
Yeah.
How did this racism of Moses manifest itself?
So all of his projects are either tinged by his racism or scorched by it. You cannot separate the way he planned from the hatred, true hatred that this man had, whether it's displacing people, how he built his highways, even smaller things. There are these stories about that he would build a pool in Harlem, but he didn't want African Americans to use it, so he would keep them cold for whatever reason, thinking that they wouldn't like cold water. Yeah. Well documented in the Caro book, and there are on and on stories about Moses' own hatred towards African Americans and other minority communities.
And most of the time, the East Tremont was a bit of an outlier because, as you pointed out, it was a largely Jewish and Italian working class and middle class neighborhood. Most of the neighborhoods that he just plowed through were overwhelmingly black, Puerto Rican, or poor.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't, listen, his calling card was he was going to do it his way, his highway, and he was going to do what he wanted to get done. But also, the tenor of the man has to be looked at, because when you have someone who has such power in a democracy, who's racist and is using his feelings and implementing these highways and bridges and parks, how could it not inflict tremendous harm on those populations? And that's exactly what happened. When we see the city erode from post-war, I mean, in 1945, think about how exciting it was to be in New York City. Remember those pictures of in Times Square, right?
Sure.
I mean, this was the place to be. And just 30 years later, the city's broke. How do you think that happens? Because of Robert Moses. A lot of it is because of Robert Moses. And the national shame is, urban planners from around the country came to New York to learn from Moses.
Right.
And then a lot of what he did here was implemented in cities across the country.
His influence was exported.
Yes.
Talk about Lincoln Center, because Lincoln Center is, I think Lincoln Center is a wonderful place.
Yeah.
But once again, the neighborhood had to be demolished to make way for Lincoln Center. What was that neighborhood like, and what happened to the people?
So it was mostly a Puerto Rican neighborhood. It was the West Side Story. It was sort of
it's on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
San Juan Hill.
And in fact, some of the early scenes of the jets in West Side Story took place on the rubble at that site because Lincoln Center hadn't yet been built. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we see a cultural center coming before the needs of people, and I think this is the overriding theme with Moses. It's that people are put last when you're planning. This is what we see time and time again with him. The way you're supposed to plan is you're putting the needs of people, how they live, work, and play first, and you build around that construct. But he did it the exact opposite. New York wanted to locate this cultural center. He said, we're going to put it here. That was it. And again, Slum Clearance Committee, which he chaired, did not help a single person find a new home.
So you mentioned what happened to New York in the years, actually a couple of decades, 2 or 3 decades after the 1950s, and the role Moses played in that. And one of the problems was what happened with mass transit. In a city like New York, mass transit is or should be a lifeblood. But he hated mass transit. I don't think that's too strong a term. So talk about his influence on mass transit, on how mass transit facilities were not properly maintained, new facilities were not built, existing facilities were not extended, and so forth.
So Moses is the greatest advocate for the car. And there's opportunity cost when you're building. Even when you're spending $150 billion in today's money, which is what he spent, mostly all of it for automobile-based transportation. There's an opportunity cost there, which is we're going to invest in highways and bridges and tunnels, but we're not going to invest in our mass transit infrastructure. And so we see that during the Moses era, during his 44 years in power, massive disinvestment from the train. And we see that, by the way, to this day, I call Moses the original sin of all of our mass transit problems, because we underfunded for so many years. We fell so far behind. There are other issues too, of course, with the MTA. But it begins with Robert Moses. If we had made investments in mass transit and not the car as we did, the city would be entirely different today.
So some of us are old enough to remember what the subway system was like back in the 1970s at the time of the fiscal crisis, and it was really horrendous.
So there was a lot of crime. You had the graffiti, a system that didn't run, but you also had the demolishing of Penn Station.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Right.
Which I think is symbolic of the era. We had the greatest structure ever built
marvel,
in North America. Greatest structure ever built in North America. Those who have gone through Grand Central Station, you can marvel at that. Grand Central Station couldn't hold a candle to Penn Station. It's true. But Penn Station fell apart. Now, Moses didn't demolish Penn Station himself, but he set the climate for its destruction. Because the car at that point in time was symbolic of individual freedom. You can go where you go anytime. You don't have to wait for the tyranny of the train schedule. This was considered the modern way you're going to move around a city. Now, cities have been in existence for 6,000 years. Cars have been with us for about 100 or so. And the idea that a car in the city can peacefully coexist in a mass way has proven to be false. Moses believed that could be true.
I think there are aspects of the Moses story that are kind of complicated. You look at something like Jones Beach, which is wonderful. I think Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts up on the Upper West Side, which is where I live, I think that's really a gem as well. He did some good things. So the question becomes how to look at it. He was ruthless and did some terrible things in getting these projects built, and they should not have been tolerated, and I would hope that they would not be tolerated today. On the other hand, the people who live in New York now and benefit from these projects, how should they feel? Should there be some residual anger once they hear the story, or should this have an effect on how well they might enjoy a day at the beach, or do they have these other thoughts running through their mind? How should we feel about it?
So I asked that question to my John Jay students, and I taught for a number of years at John Jay, and I would always begin by asking them about the different roads and parks that Moses built, and they all had these positive experiences, and they would say things like, well, he got it built. And then when they learn more about how it was built, why it was built, who it was built for, it changes the conversation. At the end of the day, you have to look at the man and each project a little differently. You cannot separate, though, out the two. The fact that the reason he built so much is exactly, that's why we have checks and balances. Like, it's not supposed to work that way. So we can't celebrate a man who went outside of our democratic system, because then what are we saying about the values of our democratic system?
But should it taint our enjoyment of some of these facilities?
It shouldn't taint your enjoyment. And listen, I think you can go to Jones Beach and enjoy it, but I think you should also understand the fundamental flaws in its creation and in the man who created it, so it doesn't happen again.
So we've talked about the tremendous power he was able to accumulate. What caused his downfall? What happened? How did Moses lose that power?
It's a couple of things. One is after 44 years, finally there was a bit of fatigue. You think, imagine one person in such power for 44 years. But there are a couple of things. While the Caro book is the Bible for a lot of us urban planners, and it's a definitive book. It's 1 million words in the book. Not once does it mention the name of Jane Jacobs.
Right.
So there are people who run a counter story to the Moses story, and who start rebelling against this twisted version of urban planning. Robert Moses wanted to build a highway across Lower Manhattan through Soho today. He wanted to build a highway through Midtown Manhattan, in one case through the Empire State Building.
Yeah, can you imagine this highway, this Midtown highway, was the plan was for it to slice through the 6th or 7th floor of the Empire State Building, which I don't even know how that's possible, but
yes, imagine
anyway,
the security
we're
risk.
fortunate that never got built.
And then one uptown too, the Upper Manhattan Expressway as well.
Street. All of these would have been elevated
highways.
Yeah.
So they didn't happen, and it was Jane Jacobs and other visionaries who fought against this. There were also plans to make Fifth Avenue run through Washington Square Park, basically divide the park and have a highway running or a road running through it. And eventually he starts to lose these battles.
Right.
And some of the shine does start to come off.
And they start to get a lot of publicity. He had worked for decades more or less behind the scenes. The public really didn't know who this guy was.
Yeah, they didn't understand that
because he wasn't an elected official.
We didn't have, there also wasn't the reporting in the press on him like there would be today.
Right.
Most of the press reports on him just glorified the work that he had done.
The master builder. That was how he was perceived.
I mean, he was very good at creating that narrative and using the press for his own purposes.
He also ran into trouble up at Central Park with the Tavern on the Green controversy. You talk about that a little bit?
Well, there were some trees there that, amazingly, this is towards the end of his time. The local neighborhood fought the removal of trees that he wanted to knock down there for the creation.
This was an area where mothers in the neighborhood used to bring their kids to play.
Yep.
And he wanted to turn it into a parking lot for Tavern on the Green.
And they won. At this point, you're having all these influences now. You're having more people aware. The Jane Jacobs of the world are now organizing. Remember, we're now into the 1960s, where political organizing is now a thing, which it wasn't in the 1950s, and it wasn't in the 1940s, and even earlier. And now you also have an opportunistic governor, in Governor Rockefeller, who creates the MTA, a state agency.
And would not be intimidated by a figure
like
Robert Moses.
Uses the state power to consolidate our mass transit system, which of course should be run by the city. It's not. It's run by the state. And the MTA is created on March 1st, 1968, which is Robert Moses' last day in power.
Right.
And Moses goes on to run the World's Fair as his last piece of
sort of like the last gasp.
We had no money. I mean, when we think about corruption, we often think about it in terms of financial corruption.
Right.
We don't think about it in terms of power.
Right.
With the Moses story, we talk about corruption, and the currency of that corruption is power itself.
He was in it for the power. He wasn't in it for the money.
No, I mean, but he had a boat. He had
the lifestyle was
cars.
pretty
He had
good.
a lifestyle that was supported by Triborough.
Right.
But personally, he wasn't enriching himself.
This has been fascinating. We've run out of time. Thank you so much, Jason Haber, for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. Here's the lead of a recent Washington Post article on what should be the biggest story of our time. Climate change is already causing staggering impacts on the oceans and ice-filled regions that encompass 80% of the Earth, and future damage from rising seas and melting glaciers is now all but certain, according to a sobering new report from the United Nations. The article goes on to say that the warming climate is already killing coral reefs, supercharging monster storms, and fueling record losses of sea ice. What struck me was that this article, and many others detailing the terrible damage being done to life as we've known it on this planet, have not generated anything like the kind of widespread alarm and the urgent responses that they should have. 17 of the 18 warmest years on record have occurred since 2000. The warming and rising of the oceans is accelerating. This past summer, all-time record-high temperatures were recorded in many parts of Europe. The temperature reached 108.6 degrees Fahrenheit in Paris. Paris. And yet, despite a steady stream of horrendous facts, most of the people in the United States and the rest of the world have reacted to the perils of global warming with a collective ho-hum. But there's an encouraging sign amid all this gloom. A worldwide protest led by young people resulted in a tremendous turnout aimed at raising the alarm about this extreme crisis. Children by the tens of thousands played hooky from school and demonstrated in the streets, demanding that the rest of the world begin taking this matter seriously. NPR quoted a 15-year-old girl from Pakistan who said, "It's mad. The people who should be bringing change to the world are not. The old people who have power are not using their power, and the young people who don't have it can only speak up." The children who have the most at stake in this simmering era seem to get it. That's all to the good. But what's the matter with the rest of us? That's all for now. See you next time.